thank the introducers, Susan and Andrew. And I see some familiar faces in the group here, which is a lot of fun always. And I even see some people coming up in the next paper with Len and Fuad, who've worked on what I'm going to talk about. So let me start by talking about the paper, if I can get this to move ahead. I'm pressing things, and sooner or later one of them is going to result. I think I just got it. Oh, I can do it that way too, sure. But this is the paper that we're talking about here for the test of time. And in my case, that's a hell of a lot of time that has gone by. Something like 46 years. And it's probably a good idea for me to say a little bit, and I'll continue to do this throughout my 13, now 11 minutes, that indicate how far we've gone in those 46 years. The paper was published in 1970, and the paper shown here was accompanied by an awful lot of differences in what we've got to experience today. Politically, in the U.S., we've progressed probably. Richard Nixon was president back in 1970. And the progression that we've got since then is worth an awful lot of discussion all by itself. I'll skip that and talk about the wireless part of what we did. The ALOHA network was used as you can see from this here, was used as another alternative to computer communications in 1970. But what were the possibilities for computer communications in the 1970s? Well, very little. There was dial-up, which provided anything from 300 bits per second to 9,600 bits per second. 9,600 if you were very, very lucky. There was direct connection if you could multiplex a whole bunch of terminals to a large computer resource of some sort. But there was very little else. And in the ALOHA network in those days, at the University of Hawaii, we asked the question, well, is it possible to think of radio communications in conjunction with these digital signals? Could radio communications ever provide a viable alternative for access to computer resources? It's surprising. Today it seems pretty obvious. We all have one in our pockets. But in those days, it's a little surprising to me how many people were sure that it was simply impractical to provide radio access to a large computer resource. Nevertheless, we thought it might be fun to try. We got a grant to try, and we tried and we did it. We provided the first wireless digital network, the ALOHA network, using wireless instead of all the other. So these two other alternatives. In addition to that, we provided the first rack for Mac. Everybody know what that is, of course? The rack is a random access channel, which was the basis of an ALOHA channel, which I think many of you are familiar with. And the Mac is the medium access control. So the medium access control in the network was implemented not by means of the conventional connections, which we mentioned, but by a new kind of channel. Not just first wireless, but first random access. And I want to separate those two, because the first wireless turned out to be more important. But the first random access allowed for the continued development of ALOHA channels through other media besides wireless media before wireless media were generally available. Well, why weren't wireless media available? stations in the United States simply had not allocated frequencies of that kind of use. Here's a picture of what we actually ended up building. This is the first ALOHA network interface, and you can see on the left of this slide a terminal, and it looks a little modern, doesn't it? Well, it looks modern. Well, it has a CRT, but ignore that part of it. It looks relatively modern until you started to look at the interface. What came out of that terminal was simply character by character, whatever was typed in at the keyboard. Nothing else. It couldn't do anything else. It was a completely dumb terminal. It simply provided an output of which key was pressed, and we had to deal with that output by means of the box that you see on the right of that slide. Well, the box was something we called a PCU, a programmable control unit. The programmable control unit had all the digital and digital processing, had some memory in it, and indeed it had a modem in it and a wireless radio in it. And that was in 1971. In 1971, something else happened. A small company named Intel came out with something called a microprocessor. And as we looked at it, we said, wow, that could really affect how we design this PCU, the programmable controller. Well, indeed it did. Watch the PCU in this slide go away. It turned into did I say PCU? That was a TCU, a terminal control unit. This is a PCU, a programmable control unit. Because by 1973, we had learned to make them programmable. The radio is shown on top of that unit, and the development of that system finally gave us a really neat way of transmitting two channels in and out of that unit from a central computer at the University of Hawaii. Those two channels each operated at 10 kilobits, and so we had two 10 kilobit channels, one in and one out, for full duplex operation. Well, that was a lot of fun, but things were progressing pretty rapidly in 1973, and people wanted to use the technology, the RAC, the random access channel that we had implemented. The first person to do that successfully in the commercial sector was Bob Metcalf, who implemented this random access channel, as you're going to hear in the next paper, by means of protocols based on ALOHA, and called it Ethernet. Ethernet used the random access feature of the ALOHA net, but not the wireless feature. The wireless feature was in fact implemented in '76, but not on the Earth. It was implemented by a company called Marisat for commercial maritime communication satellites, and it could do that because in terms of the frequencies available, they didn't have to worry about earthly frequencies. They were assigned their own frequencies. Wi-Fi, which is effectively what was built here, Wi-Fi wasn't available for some years. How many? How long did it take for Wi-Fi to come out commercially from what was essentially implemented back in 1973? 25, 28, something like that. 99, basically, was the year that Wi-Fi reared its ugly head at that point in commercial frequencies generally available. Well, okay, things sometimes take a long time. Let me keep going because I want to talk a little bit about something which is basically dealing with the last part of this session later this afternoon, and that is prediction. Here's what we had in '73. In '76, notice, by the way, that Diamond Head is still in the background there. This is one of the most beautiful offices I've ever seen, which I used for a long time. The Diamond Head was out of that window. Diamond Head is still there, but everything else changed. As a little back, let's say in 76. In 76, we predicted the use of ALOHA in wireless networks. And in 1976, I think our prediction capabilities were pretty impressive. This was before the Apple II. This was before the IBM PC. This was before any commercial wireless mobile network. And what I did, well, this is not real, I gotta say. This is a mock-up of what I was predicting in 1976. I had no idea it was going to take well more than 2 decades, 2 or 3 more decades, for it to become commercial. But we can still see at that point the direction of the technology. It's in my left hand on this slide. Well, let me finish up with essentially the last slide that we have. Essentially going through the use of ALOHA in wireless mobile. The first generation wireless mobile still had a reason to use ALOHA random access channels. That's going to go away on us because, okay, anyway, the request and control signal, let me go back. The request and control signal of the first generation wireless networks back in the 1980s were ALOHA channels. After that, second generation used ALOHA for SMS. So ALOHA started becoming part of the controls of the signals in the first generation, part of the data signals in the second generation, and then ALOHA started to become the communication medium itself, dealing with file transfers in the third generation. And of course, in the fourth generation, almost all the traffic that you generate by means of this kind of a signal are generally random access ALOHA packets. I think that's probably a good place to end. I'm within my last 2 minutes, I guess. And as I understand that these slides are going to be online, and that's why I wanted to put this up. I don't want to talk about it, but you'll find some references if you want further information in this last slide that I showed you. Thank you.
Thank you.